Welcome. Hello, everybody. Hope you're having an awesome start to your week. Today, we're going to talk about 10 rules to ensure you never become a great guitar player. So if you want to make sure you never become a great player, in fact, you want to make sure you don't even become good. If you really want to make sure you don't get good, you are in the right place because I've got a very special guest. He comes from a very faraway land, Siberia, and he's decided to join us today and come all the way from Siberia. He doesn't live in Siberia anymore, but he did once live in Siberia. Also known, among many other names and adjectives, as the Siberian Shredder, my good friend, Mike Philippov. All right.
Hello, Tom Hess.
I figured if I was going to bring in somebody to talk about ways to make sure you don't get good, you were the first guy that came on my mind. Not because I don't think you're good, but because I know that you know what people do that holds them back from getting where they want to go. And before we get started, for everyone checking us out live, let us know who you are, where you're from. We always like to see that. And we will be doing some questions at the end. So if you've got questions about today's topic, not about, other stuff, but about what we're talking about today, ask us in the chat and we'll go through as many questions as we can, probably near the end, but the sooner you ask them, the better, so we can plan for that. All right. So Mike, today, instead of asking you to share your insights about how people can become great guitar players, which I know that you know a lot about, I want to take this exact opposite direction, tell everybody exactly what to do. If they want to struggle forever, they want to ensure that they don't master guitar ever, that this is going to be hard, it's going to be rough, it's going to be frustrating. I know this is going to be hard for you because you're so great at making people become great players. But let's instead talk about how to remain stuck forever, how to basically suck, okay? So let us know, share with us your top 10 ways to ensure a lifetime of frustration and struggle.
Sure. I'll be happy to do that. And I will mainly be using examples relating to physical technique because those are the aspects of practicing students typically come to me for help with. But if you think about them, and I'm sure Tom Hess, you will weigh in on that as well, all of these can apply to creativity, soloing, phrasing, improvising, songwriting, you name it. It's all universal stuff. So the first thing that I have on my list here is not giving yourself feedback often enough. And what I mean by that is not what many people hearing this probably think I mean. I don't necessarily mean by feedback that you need to take lessons, even though that, of course, is helpful. That's always great to have feedback from a teacher. But I mean giving yourself feedback on your practicing attempts. And what I mean by practicing attempts is when you're practicing, let's say, a scale sequence and you're repeating it up and down, and it's not as clean as you'd like, you want to give yourself that space after you play it once. So, for example, I'm going to just demonstrate real quick. I'm going to play something like... You played it, then you stop, and you play it back in your mind, and you ask yourself, well, how was that on all the parameters that you know how to measure it? Many people don't do that ever. They simply just play what I just played, and then they immediately play it again, then immediately play it again, and go on like that for 15, 20 minutes, half hour, an hour, 2 hours. And if you don't give yourself that feedback, it is a complete waste of time, or 95% wasted time, because you can't make any adjustments from repetition to repetition. And because of that, you never get any better. You don't notice that there may be tension in your picking hand shoulder, or that the notes are out of time, or your hands are out of sync, or whatever the case is. If you don't notice that, you can't correct it. If you can't correct it, then what are you even doing? Unfortunately, though, this idea of giving yourself feedback like that, it's very rare that you learn to do that unless incidentally, you do take lessons from a good teacher who can point that out when you are not doing that and show you how to do it. Because most of the times when you go online and you look up how to practice scales or whatever, you find stuff to practice and you start practicing it. But then if you don't do that feedback stuff in between the repetitions, it's pretty much useless. So Tom Hess, let me ask you, this idea of giving yourself feedback on repetitions like that, can you maybe think of ways it can apply beyond just physical technique?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Definitely. So when we're talking about, let's say, improvising or phrasing or anything that's creative in nature, it's the same sort of thing. And in fact, it's usually worse when students are practicing improvising. It's usually worse than what you're talking about. Here's what I mean. When someone's working on physical technique, as you were describing, Mike, they might play something and then immediately play it again and again and again. And they're trying to get a bunch of repetitions in here. And they're not thinking about what just occurred and what do I need to do slightly different? What do we need to listen for? What do I need to focus on? And they're not doing those things. But in improvising, it's even worse because they'll play a lick once. And then instead of going back and playing it again, which would be better than moving on and playing the next lick, they just go on to the next lick. So it's complete horror. They're doing improvising, but they're not practicing improvising. So I think that's the best example that comes to mind is that most students don't sit there and work on refining and refining and refining and refining how it sounds, how it feels, the phrasing, the timing, all of those sorts of things, the expression. They just move on to the next thing because that's what they think improvising is about. And they've got it half right. That is what improvising is about, but that is not what practice of improvising is about. So when they go on and on and on and they remain stuck and they only get maybe marginally better, small, tiny increment better over a long time, this is the primary reason why. And so when I'm teaching students improvisation or when you're doing it, Mike, one of the things that we do is we're trying to get them to stop, analyze, think about it, and then try it again and improve it this time. I mean, it seems so obvious when we say it, but most people just don't do that. So one thing I was going to ask you, I thought maybe this would come up in the comments, but so far it hasn't, is that when you're talking about going back to guitar technique now, Mike, one of the things that we want people to do is to get a lot of repetitions in a short amount of time, but of course not mindless, useless ones. So I think that maybe some people might have been confused. No one asked this, but I thought that someone might. Well, how do you balance trying to get in a bunch of repetitions in a limited amount of practice time versus what you're talking about, which would appear to take quite a bit more time? How do you balance that out?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. And the way you balance it out is by not worrying so much about the quantity of repetitions and focus more on making each repetition as effective as it can be, and then just doing as many of those as you can fit in whatever amount of practice time you have. So even if you only have 10 minutes to practice and you have a choice to do, let's say, make it real simple, 10 minutes, one repetition per minute, then you spend 50 seconds analyzing what just happened and trying to decide how to refine it in the next minute. Let's say you only did 10 times that, versus for the same 10 minutes doing it 100 times the other way where it's completely mindless. I would choose the first way every single time because that's what's going to make you a whole lot better. So the way you balance that is to simply stop thinking in terms of quantity and just focus more on quality, and quantity will just develop by the nature of you doing it today, tomorrow, the next day, and so on. So that's how I think about it.
Yeah, great point here. Now, one thing that I've noticed among students is that if they would do what you suggested and compare in their own mind, actually, they're not really comparing in their mind, they're comparing in their hands. I'll show you what I mean, what I'm talking about. I'll show what I'm talking about. I mean, if they do a bunch of repetitions in a row and there's not a lot of thinking going on, at the end of, let's say, that 10 minutes or whatever time frame it is, they might feel like they have made more progress than doing it the way you suggested it. And that feeling of improvement is really just an illusion most of the time, because what's really happening, if you do a bunch of repetitions in a row, you're not really getting better. You're just getting more warmed up. So it feels like, oh, this is getting a little easier now. And it may be getting easier only because you're more warmed up. So there's an illusion of that. But if we would keep going beyond 10, 20 minutes and go off into an hour, maybe they would feel more like they would be able to experience the feeling of progress the other way. And I think that when people try to evaluate it themselves, they don't realize what they're really evaluating. And the illusion or the feeling of repetitions makes me better faster is false. But they don't really know that, but they assume that. So then they keep going, thinking, well, this is the way to go. Forget what Philippov said. I'm going to do it this way. And then they remain stuck. So have you experienced that among students?
Yes, yes. That is a great distinction. Many people don't think of it this way. And it's also, it's partly because you're getting more warmed up, as you said, from doing it a bunch of times. And the other way is your brain has a chance to refine things in the short term that is only possible because you're repeating it over and over. But in the context of like a song or a solo, you only have a chance to play something a single time. So another benefit of giving yourself feedback between repetition is the fact that you're having to space out the repetitions by a few seconds, and you are challenged more with each repetition to only play it once. You become more aware of any mistakes that may happen. So you refine it not only in general, but also make it more applicable for real life playing where you only have a chance to nail it once. So I'll just add that to what you were saying, Tom Hess.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. So if you don't have anything more to add to that one, let's move on to whatever's next on the list.
Sure. The next one is a big one, and that one is not separating motions from the notes. So it's kind of fills in the gap to what you're supposed to be doing when you give yourself feedback between repetitions. So you played something once and it was all sloppy and horrible and sounds bad. Well, now what? Well, this is where you think beyond just the notes and more about the actual emotions. So for example I always give for this particular point, if you've got, let's say, an arpeggio and you play it once and there's all kind of slop in the middle, trying hard to mess it up, this bleeding here. So if you've got that happening, thinking about it from the notes perspective is, okay, I got to play the 14th fret on the D, 14th fret on the G, 14th fret on the B strings, and it's sloppy. Why is that, and how do I fix it? The better mindset that unfortunately few, if any, well, except for people that I teach, and I know you teach this too, Tom, has that have good training on this stuff, is they just think, okay, I got to play these notes. How do I make them cleaner? Versus, what is my finger actually doing here? And what should it be doing instead to make the notes cleaner? And the benefit of thinking of it in terms of, okay, what is my finger actually doing independently of what the notes are, is it trains a fundamental, or as you call this, Tom, has transferable technique schema element or technique motion that you can then apply to all kinds of other licks that go beyond just this particular single example. Versus if you just sit there and you just try to refine this thing over here in this context, maybe you'll refine it, maybe you'll get lucky, maybe you won't. But if you play let's say a scale pattern later on that has that same finger rolling element where you have to roll the finger across several strings and play them on the same fret, if you haven't thought through, okay, this is a finger rolling motion, and these are the events that need to happen in my finger, in my muscle memory, that need to be triggered to play that motion correctly, you're going to struggle with that motion exactly the same way. So whenever I practice myself, and whenever I train students to practice something challenging, the first thing I tell them is, let's try to detach the music of it from what the hands are doing, work out the exact motions, the movement patterns, the schema patterns, as I call them, that need to be trained, because once you train them, you can then apply them all over the place. So have you found that to be a relevant thing to talk about with your students, Tom Hess, or how might you apply that also beyond just technique?
Yeah. Um, yes, I have, but often it's from the opposite perspective, which is when a lot of the students that I've taught, they're thinking so much about the technique that they're not thinking about things like phrasing and the music itself. They're going to the mechanics. They're not thinking about it on the level that you're talking about, the level they should be thinking about it. They're kind of, they're focused on technique, but kind of more just going to the motions mentally. And a lot of students are just, they let their brain go on autopilot, and they're not concentrating enough when trying to solve something. They'll play something and then, well, I'll just do it again. Oh God, that wasn't right. I'll do it again. But they're not really concentrating on it. And not only are they not concentrating on that, this is not true with everybody, with let's say the majority, the vast majority. They're also not thinking about how does this sound and feel and that sort of a thing. So those sort of things, the creative side, the expressive side, rarely gets the attention that it deserves, because people don't often separate the two and focus just on this and really focus on it consciously, going slow enough so their brain can catch up and analyze and observe what's really happening versus what ought to be happening. It's just like they don't slow things down enough so they can think. So that's one of the many challenges that I see, with students.
Yes. Yes, for sure. So it kind of goes both ways. Some people overthink just on the technique side, but ignore the expressive elements. Some people go the other way. They just focus on the notes, but not so much on the motions. And so that's partly our job as teachers, is to bring them back, fill in the gaps to where they're lacking, and make sure they focus on the right things, and don't get pulled into the direction that creates blind spots in their playing. So is it okay if we move on to the next thing?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. So the next one, I think you're going to like this one, Tom Hess, is asking for advice on internet forums, but not giving any context as to what your problem is. I see this all the time, and I just shake my head and laugh, but not in a good way. When people ask, okay, so I've been playing for 3 months and I'm not getting faster. Help me. That's literally it. That's the entire post. And then, like, what are you supposed to do with that? By you, meaning the person reading this, who's hopefully going to reply. Even if you have a great teacher reading this, there's simply no way to have enough context to what could be causing the problem, and fix it at the very least. So, as a public service announcement to anybody watching this, if you're going to ask a question on a forum, provide some context, at least a picture or a video or something, so that, for one thing, it becomes clear exactly what is happening in your playing, but also, and I'm sure you will also comment on this, Tom Hess, because I know you've talked about this before to me and to other people. When students ask questions, they often don't articulate the question either in the best way, or they ask about things that they think are problems, but that are not actually problems, like things that they see visually that maybe seems awkward, and so they perceive that to be the problem, like the flying pinky thing. But their issue can be a tension in their jaw or something, just as an example. So if you're going to ask a question, provide context, but also then keep in mind, if you're asking somebody to watch your video, think about it, and then provide a thoughtful response that's actually going to make you better and do it for free, you're kind of asking for a lot. So there's that too. Anyway, Tom Hess, do you have any comments on this?
Yeah, I do. In a couple of different, I actually have a lot of things I could say on this, but we have only so much time here. Yeah. So the first thing I notice is that what you said, that people ask questions, they set themselves up to receive very poor answers. So remember, on something like an internet forum, you're not paying these people, right? So whoever is going to respond, if they even know what they're talking about, and frankly, a lot don't. But I mean, just out there on the internet in general. But let's assume for the moment that they do know what they're talking about. Again, most don't have a clue. Well, let's let's assume that they do. And you're dealing with smart people here who are experienced, who have trained and taught hundreds or thousands of people, and they really do know. Okay. So going into that assumption, you have to set them up to give you a successful, productive, useful answer. And that's kind of what you were getting at, Mike, is that without context, without more information, perhaps a visual would be helpful. You're not likely to get an answer that's useful, even if the person answering is knowledgeable and genuinely wants to help you. He's not in a position where he really can help. And then to get to the place where he could help, now he's going to have to invest all kinds of additional free time that this person has because they're not paid, right? So into trying to help you, and like it's got to be like an investigation now to get to the bottom of what's going on here. Most people are not going to do that. Okay. Most people, even if you pay them, are not going to do that. Okay. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that students tend to self-diagnose often. They'll come, and I hear this all the time when my students ask questions, or just people will send messages on the internet or whatever. They'll ask questions and they think that they know what the problem is, but really what they're describing is maybe a symptom of something. You mentioned the flying finger thing, which it's a symptom of something else. It's a symptom of a form of tension somewhere. Okay. So that, and possibly in combination with the wrong signal from the brain going to the finger to literally fly away. Okay. So, but people will self-diagnose, take this diagnosis and ask the question to you, like, what is the cure to this disease that I have? It's like if you went to the doctor because your stomach was not feeling well, and you're going to decide for yourself what you think it is. You think you've got stomach cancer now because you've got a bellyache, and you go to the doctor and say, hey, I need you to set me up with some chemotherapy and some radiation or whatever because I got, stomach cancer. Well, what would happen if the doctor took you at your word and give you a cancer treatment and you don't have cancer? I mean, just think of what that would do to your body and how bad that would be for you. Well, we're not dealing with life or death here when we're playing guitar, but think about if you get the wrong advice because you self-diagnose and asked a question that wasn't even the right question to solve a problem that you don't even have, or it might be a problem that is out of order, meaning it's not the thing that you need to focus on first. Think about all of the time, the hundreds, perhaps thousands of now unnecessary additional practice time to go down this rabbit hole to try and solve something that is not even your problem, or it's not even the thing you should focus on, because if you did this other thing over here, you wouldn't have this problem. So, and even if you fix this, you still got this core problem over here. So it's really dangerous in terms of the use of your time and perhaps money if you're paying, a teacher to teach you. It's just such a waste. So sometimes when I get students and they do this, and people do this all the time, when I don't answer their question in the way that they want me to answer it, because I already know that this is not really what we should be pursuing, at least not at this point, maybe later, because there's something more fundamental that we must resolve first. Sometimes people become frustrated and think that, am I holding information back from them on purpose? No, I'm trying to save you hundreds of hours of wasted time and thousands of dollars in lessons over the next 2 years or whatever. So that's my big thing, is just be open-minded to what you think the problem is. Don't come with a diagnosis before. Just tell me what the symptom is, or just show me and I see it, and then we go from there. Maybe your diagnosis is right, maybe it's wrong, but go to a doctor. Okay. Don't read up on the internet of what you think it is because your stomach hurts. That's the message.
Yes, exactly right. Exactly right. So also, just as a funny side note, not really funny, but relevant side note, even though we are using the flying fingers thing as just an example, many people freak out over the flying fingers thing, and it's not an issue for them at all because of how they are looking at their fretboard. So just real quickly to demonstrate this, because I see this so often, and I talk about this all the time with students. When you watch yourself from this point of view, where your eyes are looking at your fretboard this way versus head on that way, it's always going to look like your fingers are flying compared to when you're looking at it straight. The fingers are looking a lot more textbook perfect, as it were. So don't freak out about flying fingers unless a knowledgeable teacher actually tells you that you have that issue, but don't self-diagnose that issue, because you're going to be chasing all kinds of rabbit holes that are just going to leave you frustrated endlessly and needlessly. Anyway, let's move on, if it's okay with you, Tom Hess. Okay, cool. The next one is another big general thing, more philosophical than tactical, is setting outcome-based goals that you do not control. So an example of that would be, I want to play faster, and so I am currently at 100 beats per minute, 16th notes. I want to get to 120 16th notes in 3 months. So on the surface, it seems pretty logical and good, and like you read books about goal setting and stuff that tell you to set goals because that moves you forward and stuff. But there's several problems with that. Number one, can you really know if that's a realistic goal? Well, no, you can't know that because you just made up these numbers out of thin air. That's the problem number one. And a related problem to that, what if you could have, if you actually put in your best effort and practiced as hard as you could given your situation, taking lessons with the best teacher, what if you could have gotten to 140 in 16th notes in that time frame? But because you set the bar lower artificially without realizing it, then you are just holding back your progress for no reason. And vice versa. What if 120 is unrealistic for you, but you're beating your head against the wall, practicing 12 hours a day, quit your day job, and leaving your family, go in the forest to practice guitar, and you don't get there? Then you feel like a failure, but you got to 116. So this kind of thinking holds people back, I find, in a lot of ways. And so the solution for that is to, for one thing, realize that even if you hit your outcome-based goal, whether it's speed or, let's say, songwriting goal, you want to write and finish and release your album in a year from now. Same idea. You don't know if that's realistic or not, or what hurdles will come up that'll derail you, all that sort of thing. Instead of that, we all know that we want more than we currently have, whether it is speed, creativity, or whatever it is. Focus on the steps and the processes that are required and the actions that are required to get you there. So let's say building speed. Well, what are the steps involved to increase your speed from wherever it is right now to however, moving forward in the direction you want to go? What are the steps required? Well, for one thing, you have to practice every day, or as close to every day as possible. You want to do like that feedback stuff between repetitions that we talked about, and the other things we're going to talk about later on. Ideally, if you take lessons with a good teacher, you will probably, very likely, improve much faster than if you didn't do that. So if you just write a list of all the things that, if you did them, the actions you took are going to move you forward faster, you focus on those, and then let's see where you're at in 3 months. And I bet you will be a whole lot further along than you are right now. And you can feel good that you've probably done everything you could do to get as far forward as you could. And that is a much healthier mindset, both in terms of feeling good about the journey and actually in a very tangible way getting the results, and not getting frustrated or stuck or burnt out along the way because you are failing to reach the goal or setting the bar too low. What do you think about that, Tom Hess? Have you found that to be the case with your students?
Yeah, this is what you're describing is called process goals.
Right.
I know that you know this, Mike.
Yeah.
Process goals versus outcome goals.
Mhm.
And we have complete control over the process. We control our actions, our choices, our decisions. Okay, we have complete control of that. So essentially, just to paraphrase what Mike is saying, if you control what you can control, the rest is going to take care of itself. I mean, whether you get to 120 or whatever the example was that Mike mentioned, 120 or 115 or 130, if you started at 100 and you end up at more than 100, it's not a bad day, right? Now, we can do things to make that rate of progress go faster, But the point is, you control the process, you control the actions you take, the decisions you make, how you do things, when you do things, how much you do things, how correctly you do things, the order in which you do those things. All of those things are completely within your control. And this is true whether we're talking about guitar playing, or we're talking about building a guitar teaching business, or a music career, or building wealth, or going to the gym, or whatever it is. So, yeah, I mean, Mike, I know that you work out really heavily and you've achieved a lot. I mean, you're a competitive power lifter. And I imagine I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but I imagine that it's similar there, that you focus on the process, what you need to do so that you will get to the next level, whatever that next level is for you. I don't know how many several hundred pounds you're at now with deadlift and all that stuff. I don't know if I can count that high, but point is, it's the process. You're not like, oh, I was at this and now I got to be here by next week or whatever.
Exactly. In fact, I've learned this type of thinking largely from powerlifting. All the best coaches talk about that, because when it comes to lifting weights, especially, it is not a linear or well, it is kind of exponential, but not like money exponential progress. So you can very well train for a year and gain, 5 pounds on your deadlift. And it may seem like you just wasted a year or you trained in a subpar way, but in reality, a month down the road, you can gain 50 more pounds. So it compounds in weird ways. And if you always look about always think about the result, or always look at like the number on the bar or number on the metronome, you may very well be frustrated for no good reason. So yeah, 100% in agreement there, Tom Hess. It's relevant all across the board. All right, next thing that I have on my list is, I call this oversimplification, or in what is it called, the cognitive fallacies, or what are they called, the single what am I trying to say here, single cause fallacy. There you go. Single cause fallacy applies, very many guitarists apply that to all areas relating to practicing. I'll give you a perfect example. In fact, I saw somebody ask this in the comment section earlier. They asked if we should always use a metronome. That's an example of that. These always or never type of questions, or what is the best way to do X, best way to build speed, best way to write a song, best way to do whatever, best way to practice, best practice routine, should we always do this or should we never do that? These types of questions imply that there's only one way to do it and all the other ways are wrong. Well, it's a lot more nuanced than that, as I'm sure you know, Tom Hess. Whether we're talking about phrasing and creativity or sweep picking, whatever it is, I will give you one speed-related example that is a big pet peeve of mine. I think there's like 3 schools of thought when it comes to guitar speed. One is you want to start slow and gradually build speed. That's been like the dominant thing, for many, many years. And then about a couple of decades later, in the rise of YouTube and social media, some teachers have flipped that on its head and started saying, no, this starts slow and gradually build speed in small increments. That stuff is wrong. It doesn't work. It creates all kinds of problems. The best way to build speed is to push yourself and set the metronome to 500% faster than you can play and just let it rip. And it doesn't matter if it's sloppy and you get tense, and then you just clean it up later and refine it and you work backwards essentially. And then the third school of thought is getting all nerdy and academic with like the anatomy charts and figuring out the right muscles to use and the best ways to angle the pick and all that. And there's like this war going on almost with people who prefer one versus the other versus the third way. In reality, there is a way to reconcile it if you just zoom out and you can see when all 3 of them are applicable. But the mistake that many people make, unfortunately, is they try to gravitate towards the one, most charismatic teacher that they're watching on YouTube at the moment, who is preaching the one thing. And that works up to a point until it doesn't, and then they get stuck. And if they just keep beating their head against that wall that doesn't work, it's going to continue to not work, and then they will continue to get frustrated until they realize how to reconcile all these seemingly contradictory pieces of information. So the best way I know of to get around that is to study with someone or have someone advising you who understands how to take these seemingly contradictory ideas and show you how and when and why they can all work in the right context. So what do you think about that, Tom Hess? How have you found that to apply in your experience?
Yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying here, Mike. And I think that, first of all, just a little bit of to talk about it from this side, which you and I are on, as teachers and trainers. When you see people on the internet or wherever, promoting their way of doing things, very often, very often they'll say things intentionally to be contrarian to what other people are saying for attention. Okay. And there are sometimes financial reasons or incentives to be contrarian for the sake of being contrarian. Okay. Now, it doesn't mean that what they're saying is necessarily wrong. It means that the motivation for saying this sometimes, not saying with everybody, but sometimes is for an interest that does not align with yours. Let's put it that way. The other thing is, as you were saying, Mike, those different approaches that you listed, and there are a few others as well, but those are the kind of the big ones. They all have a place and a purpose. There is some benefit to doing this way, some benefit to doing that way, some benefit to doing that way, because they are useful for solving different sorts of problems or achieving different sorts of objectives, but they don't achieve all the objectives. Now, so you kind of talked about that as being your pet peeve. Here's mine. Here's my pet peeve, which is this. There are some people out there who like to say, well, there's no one right way. Now, that sometimes is true, and it is true in this particular instance. But when people say there's no one right way, what they're really saying, most people, when most people say this, it really comes from a place of extremely lazy thinking. Okay? Because what that statement usually means when most people say it is, since there's no one right way, all ways, all approaches are equally valid. That is complete ridiculousness. That is complete nonsense. It might be true in some cases, such as this one, where there is more than one right way. But I assure you, there are thousands upon thousands of definitely wrong ways. Wrong in the sense of being extremely inefficient. I don't mean like morally wrong, ethically wrong. I just mean that if you would follow certain approaches, if you get to the goal you want to get to at all, it's hundreds or thousands of additional unnecessary, wasted practice hours to get there through this ineffective, inefficient method. So be careful when you hear people say there's no one right way. That might be true, but that's only half of the thought. The other half is, and there are many other ways which don't work very well or don't work at all or are so inefficient that the time, money, energy, and effort you'd have to put into them is simply not worth pursuing. So this is my main criticism of, like, let's say alternate picking or the cage system. It's not that those things cannot work. It's not like they have no merit whatsoever. It's just that the inefficiency, the amount of additional time required to use either of those two systems. Again, they can work, and there are a lot of great players who have learned and used that system. There's no doubt about that. But how many additional practice hours had to go in to get to the level they got to with those systems? Maybe there's a more efficient way, which has the same benefits or other benefits or more or better benefits or simply more efficient. So as a student out there, when I was a student, and Mike, when you were a student, when we started out playing, we didn't know any of this stuff. We just kind of listened to whatever that guy said or that teacher said because they knew more than we did. So who are we to question? That kind of was the thought at the time. Well, now that we know a whole lot more, we see things from another perspective. So that's my thoughts on that.
Yeah, definitely. Completely in agreement there, Tom Hess. So on a let's do that. Moving on to the next point on my list here that keeps people stuck is not understanding what I call retroactive progress. So many people assume that progress is supposed to be in a straight line, or maybe there is a plateau here and there, but then you eventually the trending line is always up. But that is not how it works with many things on guitar, especially when it comes to things like fixing bad habits. So here is what retroactive progress actually is. It means that if at a certain point you find yourself going backwards in your playing, that can very often be a very good thing. So I'll give you an example. I often get emails from students who start like my rapid fire guitar practice training program, for example, and I'm sure Tom Hess, you get the same thing in your breakthrough guitar lessons, that they say, I'm learning all this stuff about practicing and technique, and it's all good. I can see how it's going to help me. But when I apply it, I am actually playing worse. I'm making more mistakes. I'm playing slower. It is not as clean as before and all that sort of a thing. It's not as consistent. Like, why? What's going on here? Well, what is happening is it takes time for your brain to, let's say in this example, when you're learning a whole bunch of things and becoming aware of things you've been doing wrong for years, all kinds of bad habits, let's say, it takes time for your brain to A, process it all, and B, get your hands to do something different from what you're used to doing for 10, 20, 30 years. And through that extra effort, that extra bandwidth from your brain that's now spent on getting your hands to do something they're not used to doing, you have to play slower because you literally have a smaller brain. You've got a smaller percentage of your brain power in that moment dedicated to actually playing. So temporarily, your playing has to go backwards for you to take one step backwards and then shoot 10 steps forward or whatever. So it is not only normal, it is a great thing when that happens because it probably means at the very least you're about to change something fundamental, and then you'll see how it improves things, and hopefully you're changing the right things in the right way. In powerlifting, which is a sport I compete in, right before you max out and you lift the most amount of weight, let's say in a competition, you are at the most fatigue in your body and mentally from all the hard training you've been doing up to 3 or 4 or 5 days before the competition. You feel completely beat down and exhausted. Like there's no way, if this is the first time happening to you, there's no way you'll think you'll be able to lift 25% more than what you're lifting now. But after recovery, you recuperate and like all the strength gains pour in, and then you're at your strongest. It's the same sort of a thing. So this retroactive progress, many people don't get this. And the way this hurts guitar players not understanding this is they think that either they are doing something wrong, there's something wrong with them, their hands, their talent, their whatever, their potential, or their teacher is teaching them the wrong things. And so they freak out and they either stop taking lessons or stop pushing forward, when in reality, they should push through that threshold. And once things click, then you get a massive breakthrough. So this is a very, very common thing that I again see all the time. How about you, Tom Hess? Have you found that to be true in your experience?
Oh yeah, definitely. It's interesting that you mentioned this because we see this, Mike. For those who don't know, Mike and I train at live events every year, every summer. And there's one event in particular which we trained at 2 years ago called Total Guitar Mastery. It's an event that we put on, and it's primarily a technique related training event. Okay. And what happens is, let me draw you guys a picture. When students come in, whether it's that event or just come in for lessons or whatever it is, they're often frustrated because here's where they're at. This dot represents their current. Mike, I'm going to go full screen here for a moment. This dot represents where they're at right now. And they're doing whatever they're doing, and they're making maybe they're making incremental progress. Maybe it feels like they're stuck, and they're coming in because they're not satisfied with this rate of progress. It just seems too slow, or maybe they've plateaued and kind of staying at the same level like this. Okay. So what Mike is describing is that when you come in and you're being trained by us, or you're taking lessons, or being trained by Mike online, or lessons with me online, whatever the case may be, what students expect to happen, what they think is supposed to happen, is that here they are, and instead of going on this trajectory, they're going to go on a trajectory that looks like that, a higher line. That's not how it works. And if you come in expecting it to work like that, you're already set yourself up to fail. You will not succeed if this is your expectation, because it works exactly like Mike Philippov just said. When you come in, there's going to be new things. We're going to have you do things a little differently, usually better. Okay. And what's going to happen is, in the short term, your playing is actually going to go that way, the wrong direction. It's going to take a step backwards, because we are retooling your hands, and we're literally creating new neural pathways in your brain. Okay. And those new neural pathways don't have the same strength that the old ones do. They don't have the same strength yet. That's what the training is going to do. So you come down here, and then you're going to start making a recovery, and you're going to get a trajectory this way, and the progress is going to be much, much greater. Okay. But what happens is, all of this area in here, all of this shaded, this is where people quit. This is where they give up. This is where they get frustrated, and they say, this isn't working, or I can't do it, or you guys are showing me the wrong stuff, or this doesn't work as well, or my Uncle Bob told me to do it this other way. Listen, you come in, if you don't like this line that you're on, if you don't like that, cool, we understand. If you want to get over here, you might have to do this to reprogram certain things. In fact, you almost always will have to. Then you have to get past this point. Once you cross this threshold here, once you get past that, you're golden. It's awesome, because now you see where you're headed, and it's all improvement and greater rate of progress here. But where most people give up is right here. They give up, and they say to themselves, they rationalize, they justify to themselves, and they say, you know what? This is frustrating. It doesn't feel very good. I'm going to go back to what I was doing before. I'm going to go back to this line here, because at least there I saw a teeny tiny little bit of progress, and it didn't feel like so much work. Well, you can do that. If you want to give up on this, give all that up to go back to here, you can, no problem. But just understand, that's as high as it's going to get. Okay, this is the trajectory you're on. You could be up here. So it's a choice that everyone has to make for themselves. And you can choose anything you want. You can choose to remain on this line. You can choose to go through this to get over here. Totally your call. We don't care either way. It's up to you. But we know what happens. If you give up before this point, you ain't ever getting over here. You're going to be stuck over here. And we see this thousands and literally thousands of times over all the years, decades actually, that Mike and I have been teaching and training students from all over the world. It's the same pattern every single time. It's exactly this every time. So some people don't want to go through that, but those who do make massive improvements. It would be impossible not to, because we know where this leads. It is certain. If you simply do the work, come through this, you come out on the other side. If you don't, well, then you don't. That's up to you. So that's my thoughts on that.
Yes, great stuff. And unfortunately, many guitar players don't realize this through no fault of their own, because they don't have experience going through this learning process. And many teachers don't realize that either, which is worse, because they're supposed to know this stuff, and they're supposed to educate their students on this, as you and I, Tom Hess, just did. That makes all the difference.
I've got to say something about that, Mike. and and I'm not here to bash anybody. I'm not going to mention anybody's names here. I'm not here to pick on anybody. But I will tell you, I know many, and I know that you know many. Many teachers will not tell you this. Not only will they not tell you this, they won't take you through this process. Why? Because they are so afraid that you as a student will quit paying them. They won't even do this. They are horrified. They live probably hand to mouth, paycheck to paycheck. They don't want to take students through this because they know that for them, the teacher, it is much safer for their income. This is what they think. Okay. It's also why one of the big reasons why they're stuck financially teaching guitar. But they think that if we take people down here, some of these students are going to quit. And they're right. Some of them are going to quit. There's no doubt about that. But what they don't see is that those who remain that end up over here, that's what builds your reputation as an awesome teacher, because you have this track record of awesome student after awesome student after awesome student after awesome student after awesome student. It is worth taking a hit in the short term about letting the students who quit, who don't want to go through this. It's worth doing that to get over here, not only for the student's benefit, but for the teacher's benefit. Everybody wins. When the student ends up over here, everybody wins. There are no winners on this line. None. So, yeah.
Yeah, great point.
Let that go there.
Cool. All right. Next thing is another mindset related thing that causes many people to quit guitar or to give up, or at the very least, set low expectations for their potential, lower than they deserve, is what I call comparing your most average to other people's best. And this happens all the time on social media, on YouTube, Instagram, whatever. Setting aside the fact that when you see some people play guitar on YouTube, it's not always them actually playing in that moment. Not calling anybody out here, but there are a lot of people who just like mime their hands to a pre-recorded track, so it sounds better than it actually is. Which, by the way, is just how all music videos are made. But my point is, when a lot of people see their favorite players or whoever, people they don't even know on Instagram, just some brand new guy that just popped out of nowhere who's playing, and it looks like that they just rolled out of bed, combed their hair, picked up the guitar without even warming up, and just ripped through that solo or whatever, and it sounds flawless, like better than a computer could probably play. And then you compare that to your perception of your playing when you're practicing, and you are aware of all your mistakes, the fact that it takes you 157 takes to record something for Instagram, and it seems like that guy just did it in one take. And so you compare that with your reality, with your perception of other people's reality, perception being the key word, which is very often not the case for all kinds of reasons. If you keep thinking that, it becomes very, very hard to motivate yourself to continue, because you think, well, I'm so far behind, I'm never going to catch up. What's the use? And so the solution to this, and I have actually videos on my channel about this. I got a whole playlist titled something like "Don't Think You Can Become a Great Guitar Player. Watch these videos." So check it out. I talk a lot about this stuff there. The solution, for one thing, is to just realize that even your favorite players, John Petrucci, Yngwie Malmsteen, Michelangelo Badio, Jeff Loomis, whoever you like, they are all human, obviously, and they are very often, it takes them, when they play, when they record stuff, it takes them just as many hours. They make just as, they go through failed attempts. They do a lot more takes than you probably realize they do. And realizing that makes it a lot easier to not beat yourself up over the fact that you are on your journey still, and you're not perfect, and nobody's perfect. So that is an important mindset issue that I often have to coach students through. What do you think about this, Tom Hess? Have you had that come up with your students?
Yeah, sure. People often compare, as you said, they compare their normal, regular, everyday, average self to someone else's best. When you go to YouTube or Instagram or whatever, and you see people doing whatever they're doing, they're not putting out the worst of themselves. Most people aren't putting out the worst, right? They're putting out the very, very best attempt of something, the best photo, the best video, the best playing, the best whatever. That's not average for them. I mean, social media is the biggest scam. I mean, what's out there is just so fake. It's yeah, that's not their average. That's their very, 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 very best. Don't compare yourself to that.
Yeah.
Not necessary.
Exactly. So, and on a related note, the next point here is putting great players on this pedestal, that assuming that they have no weaknesses. And it's kind of related to what I just said, but here, let me give you an example of what I mean by that, putting great players on a pedestal. If you think of, let's say, John Petrucci, you think about his songwriting skills, think about his picking speed, think about his rhythm guitar chops, and just go down the list of all the skills that he has. Many people assume that all of these skills, and you can make 50, dozens of them, that they're all at the same level all the time throughout the year. Well, not only is that not true, but the better you become as a player, the more out of balance your skills kind of become. Now, I have to be careful when I say this, because being out of balance can be misinterpreted. But what I mean is, someone like Petrucci, when he's preparing for a Dream Theater show, he's got a specific set of skills that he needs to play at his best at the tour. Songwriting and improvising is probably not at the top of his priority list of things to practice. His rhythm guitar playing, musical memory, and maybe lead guitar chops, speed, those are the things he focuses on. A year later, when he's in the studio, he probably can't play as fast as he played on tour. Probably. I don't know. I'm just going off of my experience of just doing this and being around great players. But he's focused 100% on his songwriting, creativity, and musical skills that he puts out 120% on to write the next best Dream Theater album he can possibly write. And so skills rotate like that. And the mistake people make, again, is they assume that they need to have all their skills at the same level all the time. And that becomes really, really hard to do the better you become, because the bar is so high on all of your skills. That is what I meant by the better you become, the more out of balance your skills become. Of course, to a certain extent, all your skills overlap. Like, you're never going to find John Petrucci struggling to play, an AC/DC song or whatever. But when you compare John Petrucci's best at every one of these skills, there is a gap depending on what specifically he's focused on. And of course, I can't speak for John Petrucci. I'm just using him as an example that hopefully makes this point clear. So, Tom Hess, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, what you said is completely true. I mean, if there was no big string skipping section in a solo, guess how good his string skipping skills are in that moment when preparing for the album. That just doesn't feature that technique. Doesn't mean he doesn't have the skills. Doesn't mean he's still not a great player. Doesn't mean that he couldn't get those chops back up to the highest level they were, let's say, on the previous album, where there was something he had to play and record at a very high level. But if that's not what it's needed right now for that point in time, that skill is going to kind of fall by the wayside. It's not going to go back to, sucking or anything, but it's not going to be at its peak level. Okay. What is going to be at the peak level is whatever must be done to get the recording finished. And once it's done, that's it. Now it comes back time to, what do I need for this upcoming tour? What do I have to play? What are the techniques involved? What are the things I have to do? And then if it's whatever skills are not a part of that, there's not a lot of time being spent on this. So those skills are going to slide back a little bit, while the skills that are required to play whatever needs to be played on the tour, those are going to excel, because that's going to get all the attention. It's just really like anything else.
Right. Yes, exactly. And so when you are practicing, just be mindful of that, and don't expect all your skills to always be at the same level, especially the better you become. And actually, that leads into the next point, which I've actually seen a surprising number of like YouTube comments and stuff, people saying that, well, not all of us are meant to play, let's say, as fast as Ingve or John Petrucci or Jason Becker or whoever, because just like we are not all built to be Olympic sprinters or Olympic athletes. That's the analogy that comes up all the time. And here's my thoughts about that. Well, first of all, if you think that way, you're never going to put in the work to even give yourself a fighting chance to get there. That's should be obvious.
Yeah, it's a rationalization not to do the work, is what it
right is. But here's why I think, and of course, this part is kind of my opinion, so take it for what it is, but I try to put as much thought into this as I could. When it comes to the Olympics, they bring out the very best of the very best, specifically, and they try to make them all compete and see who is the best of the best of the best, right? But let's say it's sprinting as an example. And so to be the Olympic gold medalist, you have to be, top 1% of 1% of 1% of 1%. But that doesn't mean you couldn't still sprint fast as hell, like in your own backyard. And you may be, half a second or even a full second or, whatever the margin is below even the bronze medalist in the Olympics. But compared to like the average Joe who couldn't get out of his chair without, without assistance or whatever, because he's fat and out of shape and stuff, you are like incredible. You're world-class to them. And I think that playing guitar fast, and songwriting, whatever skill you want that you look up to from your favorite players is, I don't think we've seen the peak potential of like the Olympic athletes where people come together and see who's the best of the best at string skipping or whatever the technique is or skill you want to compare. And so because of that, it's not even a fair comparison to compare the Olympics of guitar with just being really freaking good. And being really freaking good comes down to just everything we talked about: training, feedback between repetitions, all that sort of a thing. And you will surprise yourself by how far you can go if you just let go of that, what I think is an unfair comparison. What do you think about that, Tom Hess?
Yeah, no, I agree. And the other thing I'll add, and this kind of segue us maybe into this question that came in on Facebook. Can you see it there, Mike?
Yes.
Okay. So maybe we'll kind of address this.
Yeah.
I'm going to tie my thought to what you just said to this question. First, let me read the question for those who are on YouTube who can't see it. This is from Christoph. Christoph says, what are the relationships between specific techniques and guitar playing speed? What should I focus on when starting to learn? Choosing a technique and practicing for faster playing? Should I practice multiple techniques simultaneously? I see 4 question marks in there. I think what he's my interpretation of the question is, should I focus on one thing to develop speed, that one technique, or should I focus on multiple techniques at the same time, one right after the other, to try to build overall guitar speed? So my thought on that is multiple techniques. And if you have to choose, because you don't have unlimited time, choose the techniques where the skills required to play them will transfer over into other techniques. Transferability is what we're looking for here. And the other thing that we're going to tie together with what you said, Mike, with my other comment towards Christoph is guitar technique is awesome. And it's a tool. And it's a great tool. It's a powerful tool. But it is just one tool. And ultimately, at least my opinion, for me personally, the purpose of playing guitar is to express myself. And we need some amount of technique and speed to express certain things we might want to express. But if guitar playing becomes a video game where we're only focused on one element, whether it's technique and speed or it's reading charts or whatever it is, sight reading, whatever. It's just a game on one element. And how much can you express oneself with one element, no matter how great it is and how great you are at that one element? So while you're getting your technique together, which is important, of course, think about the other things, the creative side, phrasing, improvising, songwriting, rhythm, timing, rhythm guitar playing. All of those sorts of things. Don't just get folk. Right now we're talking about technique, so it makes sense that Christoph would have asked this question. So this is not a criticism of what Christoph asked or of Christoph at all. I'm speaking generally now that as you're working on your technique, also be thinking about all the other elements that are important to you or necessary to you in order to express what you want to express as a player.
Yes, I agree 100% with that. So I really don't have much to add to what you said, Thomas. Cool. I got one more thing here on my list, and this one is expecting to do things right the first time you do them. So I often get this from students that they are afraid of developing bad habits, and of course, it makes sense why you would not want bad habits. Or people who already have bad habits and been self-taught for 20 years, and they say, I don't want to get more bad habits. I want to do things right the first time and every time when I practice. Well, that mindset is A, unrealistic, and B, kind of unhealthy as far as progress goes, because bad habits, or really mistakes of any kind, when you practice, are only bad when you are not aware of them and you can't do anything to change them. But just because, for example, sometimes when you're practicing technique, again, because it's an easy thing to give examples of, you may not be sure what's the best way to angle the pick or to hold the pick in that particular lick or to move the hand or whatever. It's okay to just try one thing and commit to it and see what happens after a week or after 2 weeks, because it's not a lot of work to then backtrack and change to the next thing. Some healthy amount of trial and error is not only is it perfectly fine, it is necessary to move your playing forward, because you don't always have the answer. I don't always have the right answer when I practice. So as long as you are thinking about what's going on, going back to the first point I made, that feedback between repetitions where you can assess how things feel, how they sound, whether it is a phrasing thing, the sound of the phrasing, the feeling of how easy something is to play in terms of muscle tension or speed related or articulation, whatever it is, you can always go back and fix things later. It doesn't mean you're developing bad habits or wasting time. It just means you're getting clarity on what is working, what isn't working, and that makes your repetitions ultimately more effective, because you have that base of knowledge and experience to draw on that makes you more likely to make each guitar practice repetition more effective. That's where the experience then comes in. What do you think about that, Tom Hess?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's noble in a sense that people want to make sure they're doing things efficiently and effectively. That it's good to have that mindset, but people can take things a little too far, and this was kind of what you were getting at, Mike, in that they may not realize just how many things are not perfect. And when we analyze them, when we see them play or we ask them questions, we know, because this is what we do for a living for decades, we know there might be 37 things that need to be corrected, or that at least could be corrected, or could be made better or more effective or more efficient or more expressive. Who wants to solve 37 inefficient, ineffective ways of doing things at the same time? And who can solve all those things simultaneously? So it's unrealistic to focus and attack and address all of those things at once. So, and this is why it's so useful to be taking lessons with a very, very experienced teacher who knows this stuff, because not only here, let me back up. For all the students out there or people who take lessons from whoever, when you're starting out, or even when you've been playing a while, some years, and you're taking lessons, most of the time students think, I need a teacher to teach me how to do this. Or maybe they think, I'm going to go find a YouTube video that addresses this or teaches me how to do this. The order matters. The order in which you address things, the order in which you focus on things matters quite a bit. Okay. So you don't necessarily need the answer to the thing you think you need. That answer could be useful to you, especially if it's a good answer. But what we really need to see is, what is the landscape of all the things that I might have to address over time? And then how do I know which one I should focus on first? And the answer to that question is it depends. What does it depend on? It depends on essentially two things. The first thing it depends on is what are the nature and the severity of the things that need to be addressed. And the second thing, and the bigger one actually, is your personality. Some people can't handle breaking things all the way down, putting essentially their whole guitar playing on hold for a month while we go address the most basic things like how you hold the pick. Maybe you're holding the pick in a way or holding your hand in the way that has made it impossible for you to go any further or for you to do certain techniques because of the nature of how you hold your hand or whatever. Many people don't want to go put everything on hold to go resolve that issue to fix it. So maybe that's not where we start. Maybe we start somewhere else based upon who the student is, how much we think they can handle in this moment in terms of putting things on hold while we go fix this, or not putting things on hold, but correcting a couple pieces over here, which then make something else easier to address later. So maybe I'm being a little vague right now because there are so many different permutations of this or examples of different ways this can play out with whoever the student is and what their issues are. But my main point is you can't always address everything at once simultaneously. Your brain would be completely overloaded. Even if you could handle it, it's just very difficult. So let's take one piece at a time. And that order in which we do things matters quite a bit. That's my
Yes,
on that.
exactly. Exactly right. So that actually completes my list of 10. So hopefully that gave everybody a nice list of guitar practice nuggets to chew on. But I think there's a lot there. So watch this multiple times.
Awesome. Awesome. So, Mike, you have something for everyone that they can, a free resource they can check out?
Yes, yes. It's actually on a topic that is the opposite of what we were talking about. We were talking about the 10 things you can do to ensure that you fail. These are the 5 things that you can do very quickly without a lot of practice to make sure you improve a lot faster. They're called Guitar Progress Accelerators for that reason. It's a free masterclass I have that lays out what these things are. These are not exercises or licks. There's no tab in that video, nothing like that. These are basically mindset shifts and ways to think about practicing that's, I'm pretty sure, different from anything you've ever seen before. It's going to help you improve faster with less time or get more out of the practice time you already have. So again, it's free. If you want to check it out, the link on the screen, and enjoy.
Awesome. Okay, awesome. And I've got something for you guys as well. And this is called Double Your Guitar Speed While Cutting Your Practice Time in Half. And let me just tell you what the basis of this is free, by the way, totally free. So when you're trying to develop your guitar speed is not one thing. It's actually 7 things. There are 7 elements of guitar speed. And in this free guide, I'm going to take you through what all of those 7 are and how small improvements, not huge improvements, small improvements in each of these 7 areas, when they compound on each other, just like compound interest, okay, when, for investments or whatever, when they compound on each other, you can double your speed without a lot of effort because you're making some progress on the first layer, the second level, the third level, the fourth level, all 7 elements. You can double your speed in a pretty short period of time. So check it out. Free resource for all of you guys at the link there, thomas.net/speed. All right. Awesome. Mike, thank you for hanging out here today and for sharing the 10 ways to remain stuck and never improve. That's awesome.
Thank you, Tom Hess. It was great to be here.
All right. Thank you for everyone who hung out with us here live and asked some good questions and, spend some time with us. We appreciate your time and attention. And until next time, have a great day, everybody.